Alright everybody, welcome back to We Play Games. I'm Walker, and here we are about to discuss Dev Diary number 91 for Victoria 3 in the Vicky 3 Academy. Now, we haven't covered a whole lot of the Dev Diaries on the channel so far, but I think that we should start including them in the Academy. I think there's a lot of really important information being communicated by Paradox about the game in these Dev Diaries, so if I can just, remember to check the Dev Diary page, or, maybe read it when it pops up on Reddit, then we can start including them on the channel moving forward. But in terms of first real Dev Diaries that we're going to cover, this is a really important one, because this is discussing the post-summer plans and the future development for Victoria 3. So the very brief intro here, this is mostly going to be about 1.4 and 1.5. There's a little bit of information here about the hotfix for 1.36 that actually fixes the issue with overlords annexing their subjects' territory. This is a really important one. I don't know if you guys remember, but the game was kind of broken over the winter vacation because of I think it was legitimacy issues, and so it was just causing a lot of issues for the people playing the game during that vacation. And 1.36 does look like it's fixed a lot of things. Now, we haven't covered the 1.35 and 1.36 Dev Diaries. I don't know if we will, because there's just so much information about 1.4 and 1.5 that I want to cover. But just to briefly summarize, 1.35 and 1.36 I think are basically in as good a shape as the game could be at this point. There's a lot of really interesting changes for the Voice of the People content, makes it a lot more recommendable in terms of purchasing. I think the free update for 1.3 was a lot more important than the paid update. I think that now things are looking good. If you like France and you want to play Vicky 3 in a different way and you don't have Voice of the People yet, then go ahead and get it now. But more importantly, let's get on to the 1.4 and 1.5 stuff. Now, the 1.4 stuff is a little faster, so we'll cover that, just bang it out of the way, and then we'll get down to the bulk of it, which is down here. But 1.4, despite not having as much text here as 1.5, is pretty important. It looks like they're going to be making some tweaks around the edges, but they might have some cascading implications for the way the game plays out. Because it's important to keep in mind in Victoria 3 that everything is interconnected, and small changes can have big impacts. I think convoy rating, though, is one of those things that probably isn't going to have a big impact as long as the AI isn't broken, simply because at the moment convoy rating is kind of impossible to defend against, but also the AI doesn't build tons and tons of navy, and so if you get a navy that's big enough, you kind of protect yourself by just scaring them. But this does look like a great change in terms of the playability of it. At the moment, you really shouldn't even bother trying to protect against convoy rating. Just raid the enemy first and naval invade them. A good offense is the best defense, and just keep, a fleet to help shield your capital against naval invasions if it's coastal. But this looks like the convoy rating and escort convoys missions actually are fixed. Convoy rating isn't broken in the sense that it's strictly overpowered. You can do a lot of damage to certain economies with convoy rating, but you can't really raid France into submission. You can't really raid the UK into submission unless you're way stronger than they are. But making this into a real cat and mouse thing does sound like it would be fun, and it sounds like this is a good development for convoy rating and naval stuff generally. Now, on that note, we also have this subject independence wars change. Now, this is a very short thing, right? They're saying now you don't have to pay taxes or stay in the market of your overlord during an independence war. It might just stop there, but I'm really hoping that this means that there's going to be more subject overlord interactions. I personally don't think that you should have unfettered ability to just build in your subjects as an overlord, but I would like to see some sort of foreign investment, whether it's decision-based or diplomacy-based. And although this may just be about subject independence wars, I'm kind of hoping that if they're working on subject stuff somewhere, that they're working on all of the subject stuff. We'll see, that might just be wishful thinking on my part, but I really do think that there's more information that could be coming on that front. Imperialist AI revisions looks like it's going to be a really nice one. I think right now the great powers are getting a little better in terms of pressing out their imperialist domains. You can test this by just playing with observers, but the GPs do a pretty good job of colonizing Southeast Asia and a little bit of work in Africa, but they could still be more aggressive, and I think that would be a really nice change here, because this is a time period with a lot of wars with great powers punching down, right? There There are some big wars between great powers, not most obviously World War I, but there was the Crimean War, the wars of German unification, and so on and so forth. But most of the big diplomacy plays that came up during this time period, like the Fashoda incident or the Great Game in Central Asia between the UK and Russia, didn't actually erupt into open warfare. It was more diplomatic maneuvering. And seeing the AI be less reflexive would be really nice, because it doesn't actually make the game harder to have great powers intervening against you all of the time after 1860 onward. It just makes it kind of tedious, because the AI is throwing their own growth away to try to fight a war against you, right? If you're the UK and you see France is about to start a diploplay to annex Benin, you could fight France over that, but then you'd be involved in a war for like 3 to 4 years where you're just throwing money away to try to beat the French and hopefully get French war reparations. But why waste your time? If they're attacking Benin or Oyo or Dahomey or whatever, just say, fine, I'll attack one of the other ones, right? And that would be a much stronger AI, because the AI would be trying to develop its own resources more, rather than trying to prevent you from developing yours. Because if the AI is just trying to stop you, if you can get past that, then they are pretty weak at the moment. There are some other reasons behind that, like the construction sector AI doesn't look at investment pool, unfortunately. But I think one of the things that will help the AI, not only from a strength standpoint, but also from a verisimilitude standpoint, would be seeing more imperialism. The good substitution change is also looks like it could be meaningful. This one is a little harder to actually pin down because the economic implications of changes are so important, but it looks like they're tweaking the weights in regards to goods, which should be helpful, because for those of you who haven't looked at this needs page on the Victoria 3 wiki, there are some problems in regards to the way that demand works, as well as some issues in regards to the way supply has an impact on demand. So in Victoria 3 at the moment, if you have a very, very, very small supply of a certain good inside your market, even if the price of the good is low, having a low supply will depress demand for it. And so that means that you can't like get a lot of oil demand going really early on in the game. And one of the things that was really important in the beginning of the game in real life for Victoria 3 was whale oil. Whale oil, of course, was used for heating and for lighting, but it was also used as an industrial lubricant. And it was so important to the early industrialization of the West that they actually almost hunted them out of the Atlantic. And so one of the reasons that the Western imperialists actually went to Japan was that they identified that the Northern Pacific was going to be a really nice area for hunting whales, and they wanted to use Japan as a naval base for their whaling ships. But you don't really get that sort of demand crunch in the game at the moment. Whaling is largely a useless building. The meat that it produces is not gonna make up for the fact that you're spending government ships on that, right? Because clippers are an expensive thing. You're going to need them for your ports, and sending clippers to your whaling ships, which are going to bring you back useless oil and a tiny amount of meat, not usually worth it. But if they've rebalanced things in a meaningful way, this could actually be a really important change in terms of the economics and the politics of an early nation. We'll just have to see. I really do think that there should be some sort of method to allow you to use oil in a building, even if it isn't something that there's going to be enough whale oil to apply it to everything. If there was just some industrial demand for oil, I think it would be a good change in terms of representing industry during this time frame, and also a good change in terms of helping out demand for oil. Not to mention that would also encourage the AI themselves to develop their own oil earlier on through whaling, and then that increased supply and demand in the world stage would actually help create more oil when pump jacks and, ground oil comes online. So I think that's one of those changes that hopefully Paradox does in the future. If they don't, it's not like the end of the world, but I think it would help out the economy. And just increasing oil demand in the early game might be the silver bullet. But as I said, 1.4, not a whole lot of dramatic changes here. I think the most dramatic changes are the things in the 1.5 open beta. And fortunately for us, we get it at the same time as 1.4. So I honestly don't know if I'm gonna be playing on 1.4 like at all. I'll probably do a launch day stream of it or something like that, but given that there's going to be an open beta, and I really did enjoy playing in the 1.2 open beta, I'm probably going to be experimenting with things along with Paradox. And that is, I think, the big highlight here. 1.5 is experimental. We see a lot of things from the game jam that Paradox was doing. I think they're still doing that. It looked like it was fun. Hopefully they learned a lot and they can apply some really interesting experimental stuff. Boy, there are some experimental things in here. They've got shared fronts, so you don't have like a war in pre-unification Germany just devolving into a dozen or more fronts. Yeah, that's a pretty meaningful change. I think that war personally should revolve around strategic regions rather than fronts, and then just have the generals kind of like play out in the strategic region, either largely offensively or largely defensively. But if you're gonna do shared fronts, that's fine, because they also did multiple simultaneous battles per front. That looks like it's gonna be nice as a way to keep the shared fronts thing actually working, because if you were fighting in Germany and you could only do one battle at a time, it would be incredibly slow, or it would be incredibly fast, win one battle and annex half of Germany. But multiple simultaneous battles sounds like the right fix. But they've also made some pretty meaningful changes in terms of diplomacy in Diplo plays. You can do reverse sways in 1.5. This is really, really good, because it's very frequently do I find that I would be willing to join somebody to fight France if they would offer me French war reps, but I'm not gonna go out of my way to help Benin for an obligation. That's worth nothing. We're also getting the ability to, or rather the requirement to call allies in Diplo plays. This is a pretty meaningful change for some powers like the UK, who have just a billion subjects. You don't have to fight all of the British subjects anymore. Not that they were themselves usually that dangerous, but sometimes, you know, if you fought the UK, it was annoying when they called in the EIC, because they do actually have a big navy and the ability to naval invade places. And so now the UK actually has to spend maneuvers on that, which means that, of course, any sort of war with a whole bunch of subjects is going to be for a more limited amount of territory. I don't know if that's necessarily an accurate representation of things. I do think that there needs to be some rebalance in regards to mid and late game diplomacy. I think that demanding territory is kind of too expensive, both in terms of infamy and maneuvers in the mid to late game, especially if you're trying to invade unincorporated states. There should be some sort of rebalance there, so that way you're not spending all of your maneuvers pulling in your subjects and fighting over like war reparations and open market in the late game. But this does look promising, and it looks like it's an interesting change. There are also some new sways, like joining a customs union. I think that's pretty neat. But the biggest thing here, I think, by a long shot, is local price variation. So local price variation kind of exists in the game. Yeah, if your market access is 100%, then you don't experience it. But if market access is less than 100%, then the way the game currently works it is that local prices actually start to be important. So if you're just working on 75% market access in the game right now, you can kind of experience what they're proposing moving forward. But what it means is local prices actually are important. And this is, I think, pretty important for the meta. I don't know how much you can modify the cost of these goods via trade. That'll be something, I'm guessing, that's based off of your trade centers themselves. So this could have some pretty meaningful impacts on free trade and the way that you should approach trade in the late game. But it almost certainly is going to have a meaningful impact on the way you industrialize a nation. Because at the moment, the way that you industrialize in Victoria 3 is just by focusing exclusively on throughput bonus, right? You just build things up to size 21 or 31 or 51, depending on how big your economy of scale bonuses is capped. But you build those big buildings, they generate a whole lot of throughput, which in turn increases demand for a specific good, but also increases all of the outputs. But just increasing demand and supply isn't really enough anymore. You kind of have to build real economies in lots of different states. Now this looks really complicated, and I'm gonna have to see how it actually pans out in the game. What sort of things can you do to bring the prices together? Does it use infrastructure? I don't know. But this looks like it's gonna be really, really important in terms of the economic and social implications of industrialization. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing more on this from Paradox Interactive. There's also new buildings and production methods. This might include a method of production that uses whale oil. I hope so, but I'm not holding my breath. But more importantly, they have introduced vineyards as a dedicated agricultural building. I don't know if I'm ever going to build them because I generally don't like cash crops, but I think that it is nice that they're here, so that way the autonomous investment can build them for me. And then, of course, finally, they are making some updates to battles themselves with retreat and pursuit and military formations. Now, there isn't a lot here in terms of how the mechanics of these things are actually going to work, other than the retreat and pursuit bug, which is still in the game, is going to be dealt with. Now you can actually win a battle in less than 6 months, even if it's just against 10 guys and a horse. But this right here is kind of more of a prefaced thing than an actual thing in the dev diary itself, because Paradox tells us right here that they are going to be telling us more on August 10th. So look forward to that. I'm really looking forward to covering more of this stuff. This local price variation thing, I think, is probably going to be meaningful in terms of the meta. I think this might actually be one of the most meaningful changes to Victoria 3 since the introduction of the autonomous investment pool. But let me know if you're planning on playing on 1.4 or 1.5. I'm definitely planning on playing on 1.5 myself. It's right here, right? It's the higher number. Line go up. All right, that's Walker. Take care.